This area here is perfect for landscape photography. Beautiful mountains and a relatively untouched nature. I'm here in the southern Alps in the north of Italy. On one side you can see in the distance the Dolomites, and on the other side another mountain range of the Alps. The highest peaks here are between 3,000 and 4,000 meters high. But today I do not want to talk so much about the mountains here, but more about landscape photography. I would like to tell you a little bit about my learning process. That is what I have learned so far on this topic and what is causing me problems. Today I brought the Sigma 16mm F1.4. It is perhaps my favorite APS-C lens for the Sony E-Mount. However, it is certainly not the lens I use the most. I will tell you why this is so and how well this lens is suited for landscape photography. All B-roll shots in this video were also taken with this lens, so you can get a general impression of what kind of image this lens produces. You will also find links to all products I use today in the video description. And in case you're new here, my name is Werner and this channel is mainly about filmmaking tutorials and reviews of consumer cameras. Consider subscribing to the channel if you're interested in these topics and have fun with this video. I would not describe myself as a landscape photographer. Photography is a hobby for me and my focus is usually more on filmmaking. I always had the impression that I can tell stories better by shooting videos, that I am able to express something better and transport emotions much better with video. Nevertheless, in the last few years I have found more and more pleasure in taking photos as well. And because I fortunately live here in an area that is excellently suited for this purpose, I've become more and more involved in landscape photography. However, I would say that I still have a lot to learn, that I am rather in the early stages of this learning process. When it comes to photography, Instagram today plays an important role, especially for people like me who do not photograph professionally. I think that Instagram is both a curse and a blessing in this context. The great advantage of Instagram is that it offers you a showcase for your photos. You can share your photos with others and of course you're always happy to receive positive feedback. This is motivating and encourages you to take more photos. It's just fun to upload a photo once in a while and share it with your friends. And even though your Instagram account may be a lonely place like mine, this social reward motivates you to take and upload more photos. However, Instagram also causes me problems and makes me doubt what sense it makes to take photos of landscapes. Especially when it comes to landscape photography, there is a huge amount of incredibly great photos on Instagram. Just about every valley, every region, every unknown spot has already been shot in the most diverse weather conditions. So for me the question arises, what could be the sense of taking another photo here? What can my photo contribute? What difference can it make that I take another photo here, especially if this photo is probably no better than many other photos that have already been taken of the same location? Of course, I am aware that this is, as I said, a hobby, so it must be a pleasant activity in itself. And it is definitely great, especially to capture the experience in nature. To capture the memory of a certain day or a certain trip is something really beautiful. And the special photo is probably taken for oneself and not for the others. As far as landscape photography is concerned, I have learned a few important lessons in the last few years. Just a few simple basics to make better photos. If you're just starting out in landscape photography, the most important lesson you should learn is that the light is the most important factor. Light has the greatest influence on the quality of your photos. This is of course true for any kind of photography. However, since you're not in a controlled environment, when taking landscape photos, you should ask yourself what factors affect the light. Obviously, apart from the position of the sun, these are the time of the day and the weather. The best time of the day for landscape photography is before or after sunrise or sunset. The light is softer and depending on the day and the time, it has an orange or bluish tint. You will usually take more interesting photos at these times of day and photos with more atmosphere than at noon. Clouds and generally bad weather can also give the photo a more dramatic look and have a big influence on the mood. Clouds can also act as a softbox and soften the light. The mountains are of course not always the best place to take photos in bad weather. On the one hand, clouds often hide the view, and on the other hand, bad weather in the mountains can quickly become dangerous. Today we have fantastic weather here, and there are hardly any clouds to be seen. This made my hike more pleasant today, but in my opinion, these are not the perfect conditions for landscape photography. But that depends of course on what kind of photo you want to take. And you simply cannot choose the weather. In general, this region here is relatively weather resistant, and then you can always come back to the same spot to take new pictures. Another aspect that still causes me some difficulties is the right composition. I think the goal should be to make the photo interesting, to guide the viewer's attention. For more depth, it is suitable to combine the panorama with elements in the foreground. Then you can look for possible leading lines. Is there anything in the composition that could guide the attention? You can use foreground elements such as trees to frame the scene. And of course, you can use the rule of thirds to make your composition more interesting. Often it is difficult not to put too many elements into the same composition. The image should not contain too many different dominant elements that distract from each other. It should always be clear what is the main focus. And as always, it is probably true that you learn the most by trial and error and frequent photography. Theory can be a starting point, but it cannot replace practical experience. But that is probably the case with most things. Now let's talk about the Sigma 16mm. Is this lens suitable for landscape photography, and is it the perfect lens for landscape photography? Basically, I would like to say that it is a great lens. It is sharp, focuses well and without problems. The manual focus is also easy to use, even if it is a focus-by-wire system. But in most cases, this is not a problem in photography. With an aperture of 1.4, it is very fast. However, this is a feature that not everyone needs in landscape photography. The classic landscape photographer will use his lens on a tripod and therefore does not necessarily need a very fast lens. In addition, in landscape photography very often an aperture of 8 is used, simply because most parts of the image are in focus and the lens usually offers the best performance. It's clear that with an aperture of 1.4 you may be able to create certain creative compositions that would otherwise not be possible. But that depends on your style and whether you want to achieve this kind of look. In the case of landscapes, however, a slightly smaller aperture would be sufficient to create a background blur due to the large distances. On the other hand, the high aperture is of course suitable for astrophotography. If that interests you, this lens is certainly one of the best options for the Sony APS-C system. Also, the sun stars become beautiful and look quite good. With 16mm, the lens has a focal length that I think is well suited for landscape photography. Personally, I think it is almost the perfect focal length for this. Some photographers would perhaps prefer an even wider focal length for landscape photography. In addition, if I had to buy a lens specifically for this purpose, I might prefer a zoom lens. This is mainly because it would give me more flexibility. It's just that sometimes you want to zoom in a little more for the best composition, or sometimes, as I said, you would prefer an even wider focal length. It is often argued that the higher sharpness of a prime lens is more likely to allow the image to be cropped in post. And of course, one thing is clear. If you publish your photos mainly on Instagram, you can crop the image significantly without much loss of image quality. Especially if you are doing longer hikes in the mountains, it is always an advantage if you only have to bring one lens, just to save weight. This in turn would be more in favor of a zoom lens. Among the APS-C lenses, the Sony 10-18 f4 would be a good choice if you prefer a wider lens, or the Sony 16-55 f2.8, which is definitely one of the best APS-C lenses for the E-Mount, would be a good choice. Basically, I think the Sigma 60mm is a good choice, especially if you want to try astrophotography. For me personally, it is also a great lens because it is also excellent for shooting video, as you could see from the different shots in this video. At the beginning I said that I do not use the Sigma that often, although I appreciate it very much. This is simply because the lens has no image stabilization. And since my camera also has no internal image stabilization, I either have to rely on a very steady hand when filming, which doesn't always work, or I have to look for another kind of stabilization and bring a gimbal, for example. But this is not the best solution for longer hikes. Finally, I will show you some photos I took today with the Sigma. And that's it for today. If the video was interesting for you, give me a like as feedback, and see you next time.